Uh, my name is David Prue, as you know, and I'm not sure what I am. When I went to college, it was first generation college, I asked the most important question you could ask: who makes the most money when they graduate? And the answer was engineers, so I became one. So probably a mistake, surely a mistake, now that I understand a little bit more of my psychology. 5 years into my engineering career, I knew I was going in the wrong direction, although I was doing okay and having some fun. I bailed and I went off to get a doctorate in organizational psychology. So I might be an engineer and I might be an organizational psychologist. And I never had a vision of teaching or being an academic. My idea was to go to work for a Boston consulting group, which is where most of my colleagues were going. You could make $300,000 a year there, or maybe $14,000 at a place like Gannon. However, loads of people that I went to graduate school left, and once they were making their $300,000 a year, they failed to finish their dissertations, and they ended up not getting their degrees. And I thought, well, maybe it would be prudent to go to a school somewhere within driving distance of where I was in Ohio. And Gannon was just opening its MBA program. And they were desperately looking for some people that had some credentials, and they grabbed onto me. I believe I was 27 when I started there. And next thing I know, I had forgotten about my vision of becoming a big-time consultant, and I was an academic. And I exclusively taught graduate students. And in the early days, I was teaching MBA students, and that's how I met Bill. What did I do? I turned it off. So one day I'm sitting in my fabulous office at Gannon, which is, 6 folding chairs and a plant that I was trying to nurture in the corner, and a couple of bottles of water, and silly graduate students running around asking for this, that, and the other thing. And my secretary said, "There's someone here to see you, and I think you ought to pay attention to this person because he's from the Knox firm, and they're pretty well known in town." Now, I grew up knowing Wally Knox as a frightening basketball player who was maybe a year ahead of me, like stuff, right hand, left hand, behind the back stuff. That's how I knew him. So I knew he was associated with the Knox firm, and I knew others that were associated with the Knox firm, but I couldn't imagine why anybody from the Knox firm was coming to visit me. But here's something we were doing at Gannon that was cutting edge, and one of the great opportunities I had when I started the program at Gannon is I could do anything I wanted. Nobody knew better. And one of the cutting edge things that MBA programs were doing was they were taking their final semester students, organizing them into project teams, teaching them project management skills, going out into the world and solving actual problems. And in the early days, we had students who were interested in healthcare, public policy, as well as business. So we had all those kinds of projects going on, and people were constantly pitching projects to me. And that's the first time I met Bill. He came to see me. He sat down quietly in a folding chair in an awful office with too much noise, too many distractions, and pitched a project, he said to me. One of the many things he said to me that caused me to stop and think: "Do you know anything about demographics?" Well, kind of, but not a whole lot. He said, "Well, where do you think the geoeconomic center of Erie County is?" I said, "Probably south of here someplace." He said, "Do you know where St. George's Parish is?" I said, "Well, of course I do." Not that I went there very often. It was too scary for me to go past 12th Street. I still live my life mostly between 12th Street and the Bay. But Bill was a loyal parishioner there, and he said, "Here's something we've got to figure out how to do. If we're going to attract people to St. George's and keep them, we have to appeal to their families. And what young families want who are crowded around the geo-economic political center of Erie County, is they want their kids to be well taken care of. And what Catholic grade schools don't do very well, and he said, prophetic, most of the Catholic schools and most of the Catholic churches will be gone in 20 years. The only ones that are going to survive are the ones that are located properly, and they know smartly how to take care of families. And the way you take care of families, this is so Bill, is by taking care of their children. St. George's had a traditional grade school. They didn't have preschool. They didn't have kindergarten. And Bill said, everyone at St. George's is against what I want you to tell us that we should do. But I want you to arrive at this properly. I don't want to steer this. I want you to go and find out whether or not we should offer preschool, summer placement for kids, and/or kindergarten, so that we'll be taking care of the children of families and attract people to come to our place rather than going to public schools or wherever. I said, Bill, we'll take a look at that. 2 semesters we worked on that project, and guess what we learned? Over and over again, Bill was right. St. George's did everything right, not because Bill knew what we should do, he steered, but we figured this out for ourselves. And this is a contribution that Bill made that maybe not so many people would know that he ever made unless you were in the middle of what he was doing at St. George's. St. George's made many, many awards to Bill, and they were so thankful of his influence there, and they understood it better than most people. Well, came a point 20-some years ago when I'm thinking I'm not really happy. I was never really thinking I was going to do this forever, and here I am 33 years into my career again. And things had changed a lot. The leaders that I thought the best about had gone. The school was moving in different directions, so I just quit. What other spontaneous thing should you do when you're whatever age I was, 50 or whatever at that time? I never doubted my ability to make money or find another job. I knew that wouldn't be a problem. I had a small consulting practice. My biggest client was General Electric. They were trying to hire me to go, not to GE in Erie, Pennsylvania, of course, but to Crotonville and work with them in training, where I was spending a whole lot of time. And I started focusing on, I quit Gannon and started focusing on my consulting career. Suddenly I decided, I don't really like this. This is stupid, flying all over the place, being in airplanes, being away from my wife and my kids who were gone by that time, but I still wanted to be able to go and see them. So one of my clients that I was taking care of for free because I liked them and I thought they needed some help was the Erie County Historical Society, which had just gone into, they just had a merger. And the merger was between the old museum, which was a part of the school district, which was thinking hot potato, and passed what they were doing along to the Historical Society downtown, where Bill Garvey was a longtime leader. And now we've got the Historical Society, and I'm telling them as a free consultant that we've got to go find somebody who's a museum person that knows how to run a museum, also understands the professional aspects of running a historical society, because they were trying to do 2 different things, difficult. We've got to find somebody and hire them because we don't have anybody here that knows what they're doing. And we're embroiled in a terrible sort of nightmare political issue, which was being won by John Vanko, who looked like the anointed person to run everything in town that had anything to do with museums at the time. And just to give you a sense of where the Historical Society was, we had lost, our endowment had gone from $8 million to $3.5, and we were running about $55,000 a year in the red. Not such a good place. So there I was at the annual meeting about to introduce the guy that was going to become our new director, which we recruited. And we got a phone call that said, sorry, I've taken a look at your financials, and I'd have to be stupid to take this job, so I'm out. So there we are with no new director to announce. And we soft pedaled around that at the annual meeting, and the board said, we have an idea. Maybe you'd like to be the director. We know that you would like a challenge like that. Challenge. So I'm going to be the director of a historical society. Not that I know exactly how to do that, but I was kind of a keen student of history, and especially local history, and I thought I could think of some things that we could do that make things better. So I took over, and what you see right there is what's happened to the Erie Historical Society. But let me tell you that at the time that I took it over some 20 years ago, the board had a straw vote, it didn't count, and they were voting. There was 30 people on the board. Can you imagine trying to be in charge of something like that? And they had just voted 17 to 12 with some abstentions to shutter the place. We just can't do this. This doesn't make any sense. Then I got the call from Bill, who I characterized as being a counterintuitive decision maker. Bill comes to see me again in my office. Only now it's my office in a rundown corner of the Historical Society, and says, I know what you're thinking. You're a crazy person running around trying to save money, slicing this and chopping that, and you're fighting with the board because they want to shutter this place. You can't do it. You got to go visit Bill Garvey and talk to him before you make any decisions. Went to visit Bill Garvey, and guess who was in his office? Bill Sennett. And they said to me, you've got to keep this thing going, and if you can make it work for another couple of 3 years, it's going to be a lot of work. It's going to survive, and it'll be great. And I had confidence. Next counterintuitive issue. I'm about a year in. I'm struggling to save money. I've cut too many staff. I've been accused of being a butcher for getting rid of too many people. I'm running around begging for money in the community, running a capital campaign, and Bill comes to see me and says, I've got an idea for you, and you're immediately going to think it's stupid. I said, well, what's the idea? He said, I want to host the Gettysburg Foundation at the mansion on 6th Street, and they want to come here to Erie, Pennsylvania to try to solicit money and get people that want to join the foundation. And he said, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why would we have a bunch of wealthy folks from around here come and introduce them to the Gettysburg Foundation when we'd rather have them come here and give them 6 bottles of mid-level, not cheap, white wine, and have them become part of our mission to raise money. Bill said, trust me on this. This is going to work. And it did. When they all left, they said wonderful things about the Historical Society. They proclaimed the mission statement that we had just developed as the best one they'd ever seen. And these were some professional people. And not only did they get a whole bunch of people that signed up to be part of their mission, but we got a whole bunch of people that signed up for ours as well. Some people, believe it or not, this was an amazing phenomenon for me, had the resources to sign up for both. Stupid me. Why wouldn't I understand that? I think my job here tonight, after writing the testimonial that I hope you've read, and if you haven't read, you'll take a moment to read, is to just kick this off, tell a couple of stories. I have been privileged to know and work with Bill. He has influenced me in so many ways. He was always right. Counterintuitive so many times, but always right. Everything he told me turned out to be absolutely correct. He's the first guy that steered me to think carefully about the demographic shifts we're all looking at right now. You drive down the street and pass church after church after church with a for sale sign in it. If anybody goes to church anymore, there's a good chance that they're going to one of those mega churches at 2 thruway clusters where the big thing is your Q rating and a TV channel that runs off of you. What has happened to places like Sarah Hearn? All the old little Catholic churches that we knew. St. Andrews, my old school, shuttered. St. Patrick's, my wife's old school, shuttered. How is this all going to work out? Who knew about that before anybody else did? Bill Sennett. So I'm going to step down from here now and turn the podium over to whoever wants to speak. There are plenty of folks sitting in the audience, beginning with my friend Tom, who is going to come up here and follow me. I hope you'll all feel comfortable coming up, saying a couple of three things about our friend Bill Sennett. And by the way, without all of you who helped me to do this testimonial, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So thank you again. This is a privilege. And my condolences to the family. What a wonderful man.
Well, thank you, David. And I'm going to say more than two or three things. I hope that's okay. But I do want to thank you for this interesting presentation, but also for the wonderful printed biographical sketch that you did of Bill. And I do hope that all of you will read that if you have not yet. I want to thank Ferky and the Jefferson for conceiving of that sketch and the program that Ferky has outlined, and for hosting this program this evening. I have been privileged to have a number of fine colleagues and mentors at the Knox firm, but Bill certainly stands tall among all of them. And I should say many of these people I'm talking about are here this evening, so they'll be able to call me out if I make any mistakes in the Knox firm part of this presentation. But Bill, as I said, really stands tall above all of them, because I really owe Bill my, my personal area of focus in my career at the firm, and I figuratively and literally sit in his office at the firm now, so this opportunity to share a bit really means a lot to me. And really for the family, some of the things I'm going to talk about in Bill's career, he never really talked about. Maybe he explained some of this stuff to you, but the more you dig into it, you really do realize. Okay, I thought I was giving the feedback there. So how remarkable his career was, and how there were so many things that really distinguished him from his peers really at the outset of his career. When Bill graduated from Georgetown Law School in 1955, he became a law clerk to Judge John Danaher of the U.S. District or U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. And this judge was a former United States Senator from Connecticut who had just been appointed by President Eisenhower to that seat about the year before Bill joined as clerk. And we found that in doing some research on this, well, first of all, let me stop and say that for the non-lawyers in the room, I want to remind you that in our federal judicial system, there are 13 circuit courts of appeal that stand in between the 94 federal district courts that serve the various states and territories in the country, and then on the other hand, the United States Supreme Court. So most of those circuit courts will serve 3 or more states. So for example, locally we have our Third Circuit, which serves Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and the Virgin Islands. In D.C., as we all know, most of the federal agencies and executive departments are located there, and they give rise to lots and lots of administrative and constitutional law questions. And so the D.C. Circuit covers just that small geographic area, the District of Columbia. And it's generally regarded to be second only to the Supreme Court in its prestige and its influence. And if you don't believe me, I will give you some statistics. 4 of the 9 current Supreme Court justices previously served on the D.C. Circuit. Chief Justice Roberts, Justices Clarence Thomas, Brett Kavanaugh, and Ketanji Brown Jackson, as did in the past Warren Burger, Antonin Scalia, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and perhaps the 2 most notable judges whose nominations to the Supreme Court were not confirmed, Robert Bork and Merrick Garland. So needless to say, a clerkship on the D.C. Circuit is eagerly sought after, extremely difficult to obtain, and one that would write the clerk's ticket to a prominent career in a major law firm or in the highest levels of government service. And it's very rare to have a clerk really of any of the circuit courts practicing in a community like Erie. We actually happen to have 2 circuit court clerks at the Knox firm right now, but I can tell you that there has never been another District of Columbia Circuit Court clerk practicing in Erie, nor is it likely that there ever will be. So Bill had many options available to him after that clerkship, but he decided to return to his hometown to practice. First for about 7 years with his father, B. Walker Sennett, and he quickly became involved in politics. We'll talk about that for a moment. But in 1965, he came to the firm of then known as Knox, Pearson and McLaughlin, which had only been formed in 1958, really, after Bill had graduated from law school. And the firm at that time consisted of 3 partners, the named partners, Bill Knox, John McLaughlin, and Connie Pearson. Gerald Weber had the previous year been appointed by President Lyndon Johnson to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. And there were 3 associates at the time. One of them is in the room, I think. Ed McCain is here, or was here. And that was the firm. And so Bill, didn't take him long to become a partner in the firm. In fact, it was the very next year, January 1st of 1966, that he was appointed named a partner in the firm, as you see from this newspaper article. But as I said, he'd been already quite involved in politics. He had had a hand a few years earlier in the upset election of the last Republican mayor of the city of Erie, Charles Williamson. He had been appointed in 1963 by Governor Scranton to be a special assistant attorney general, which was a part-time job. And 6 months after he became a partner at the Knox firm, he became the administrative assistant for Lieutenant Governor Ray Schaefer from Meadville, as most of you know. And when Governor Schaefer was inaugurated, when Lieutenant Governor Schaefer became the governor in 1967, Bill was soon appointed Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And he was at age 36, and I note, Ferky, you talked about your age 36. Maybe that adds a little bit more color to the story. At age 36, Bill became the youngest Attorney General in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and indeed the last appointed Attorney General in Pennsylvania, because the Constitution of Pennsylvania was amended the following year, and from then forward we elect our Attorneys General. So during his service in that office for nearly 4 years, Bill shepherded through the system and argued several significant cases that ended up in the Pennsylvania and U.S. Supreme Courts. One, before the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, upheld the constitutionality of legislation authorizing the issuance of industrial development bonds in Pennsylvania, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Another upheld the validity of the 1968 Pennsylvania Constitutional Convention, which I just mentioned, and the subsequent adoption of the proposed amendments by the electorate in Pennsylvania, which was a hard-fought battle. And at the end of it, the United States Supreme Court declined to accept an appeal from the decision of the PA Supreme Court, which Bill had won in front of that court. A third one of these decisions of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court of relevance to Erie was a decision that reaffirmed the constitutionality of the Community College Act of Pennsylvania when an effort was made to block the creation of the Community College of Delaware County. Bill was also involved in 2 landmark cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. Shapiro versus Thompson challenged the constitutionality of minimum residency requirements as a prerequisite for individuals moving into a state to receive public assistance benefits from the state. And there were a number of other states that adopted these requirements. Those cases were all consolidated for argument in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And Bill was chosen to argue the case not only on behalf of Pennsylvania, but on behalf of all those other states who were involved with similar legislation. His opponent in the oral argument was none other than Archibald Cox. And although the state laws were found unconstitutional by a 6-3 vote, that case sparked debates about federalism and welfare reform beginning in the Nixon administration, which many of you will recall, and really those debates continue to the present day. So it was a very significant case. The second case, Lemon versus Kurtzman, involved the constitutionality, the challenge to the constitutionality of a Pennsylvania statute that reimbursed private schools, including religious schools, for teacher salaries and textbooks relating to instruction in secular subjects. And Bill led the defense of this statute throughout the entire process leading up to the consideration of the case by the U.S. Supreme Court, but the case was not argued there before Bill had stepped down from his position as Attorney General, which actually turned out to be good timing for him because the Supreme Court found the statute unconstitutional by an 8-0 vote. But the rest of the story, which is sort of interesting, is that the analysis that was established in that case became the principal means of interpreting the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment for over 50 years. And it really it was a very complicated test that the lawyers in the room remember learning about in constitutional law class, and really whether you were on the right or the left, it was very complicated. Justice Scalia, in his typical colorful fashion, once compared the decision in that case to, and I quote, a ghoul in a late-night horror movie. I don't know what that really means, but in any event, the case was finally overruled by the U.S. Supreme Court just last year. And so I guess you could say in a very circuitous route, Bill's logic in that case really ultimately prevailed over a half century later. So it's now 1970 in my story. And as I said, the Constitution had been changed. The old Pennsylvania Constitution did not allow a governor to run for a second term. So that rule applied still to Governor Ray Schaefer. So the big political question in 1970 was who was going to be the Republican candidate for governor. Now, you all know that a young, effective, and popular Attorney General was elected governor of Pennsylvania last year. And in this respect, politics was not that different 52 years ago. So there was an effort being made for Bill to be touted as a candidate for Republican governor. This is not a real newspaper that you see, but it is a mock campaign piece that was testing the waters for Bill. I don't expect you to be able to read it all, but I think the headlines and the photos are going to give you a really good overview of the work Bill accomplished as Attorney General and what he could have done had he become governor. In the top left there, you'll see forecast, bright, fair, and cool. What a dead-on characterization of Bill. I just think that's great. We read here about a crime crusade. This was a nationwide conference that was directed by Bill. We see a comment by Senator Hugh Scott, who was always an ally and booster of Bill's, not endorsing Bill, but saying that the senator was opposed to the selection of Arnold Palmer as the Republican nominee, if you can believe that. And then you see Bill's work leading as the chair of the Pennsylvania Crime Commission, launching a fight against organized crime in the state. You see a photo, you see a photo of Bill with President Nixon and Mrs. Nixon, and the woman who was chosen by President Nixon to be the consumer advisor in Washington, D.C. And the article contains a statement from a Federal Trade Commission official applauding Bill for his work in developing consumer protection legislation in Pennsylvania and indicating that that legislation would serve as a model to be promoted by the FTC nationwide. You see on the next slide here, a probe into gang slayings in Philadelphia. Some things don't change much in history. And then you see a wonderful photo of the Sennett family, missing one member, Carolyn, who's here this evening, but was not with us in those days. But Tim is here, and just a wonderful photo of the family. We see an article about a progressive prison reform proposal that Bill developed for creating regional jails that would replace the practice of detaining defendants who are awaiting trials alongside already convicted prisoners, either in very substandard county jails or in the large maximum security facilities. So Bill, obviously for good reason, was well respected for what he had accomplished as Attorney General. Ultimately, the Lieutenant Governor, Raymond Broderick, was selected as the Republican candidate, and he was soundly defeated by Milton Schaap, who served then as the first two-term Pennsylvania governor under the new Constitution. So what's my takeaway from this? My takeaway is that Bill was not yet 40 years old until the middle of 1970. So no offense to the many impressive winners of our local 40 Under 40 awards in the Erie Reader, but what we're talking about here are really some major accomplishments by age 40. So Bill returned to Erie and to the Knox firm in 1970, just before a second founder of our firm, Bill Knox, father of Wally Knox, had been appointed by President Nixon to serve on the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania. 2 years later, Senator Hugh Scott proposed Bill's appointment to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. But politics interfered, and it really was not another 15 years until Erie got its first circuit court judge, Richard Nygaard. Bill soon went to work building an outstanding legal practice representing clients in the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, but primarily over the years serving significant governmental clients like the Erie Sewer Authority, the Port Authority, school districts, and other authorities. And David was talking about his organizational development background and management and so forth, and I was thinking of how they always teach us you have to have your employees appreciate the significance of the work they're doing and wherever they're working so that they will be motivated and realize what good they're doing. So several years ago we had the idea, well, we'll have everybody in the law firm get up and talk about what we all do as lawyers. And when Tim got up, he started, and you'll have to correct me, Tim, it was like, well, the first thing you do, you get up in the morning and you turn on the water, and that's because the Knox firm is working for the Water Authority and issuing the financing, or you flush the toilet, the Sewer Authority, you get the idea, go on and on. But this is really important stuff that Bill, behind the scenes, was working on. And I had said earlier that Bill was an architect of the constitutional and statutory provisions that codified Pennsylvania's procedures for issuing tax-exempt bonds for school buildings, public works, other infrastructure projects. There were other developments in the law at that time that allowed authorities to issue bonds on behalf of 501c3 nonprofit organizations like hospitals and universities, and also even for private businesses like manufacturers. So all of these projects became very significant for communities like ours. They really were the drivers of a lot of economic growth in our community and in communities like ours. And previously, borrowers in regions like ours needed to go to New York or Philadelphia or Harrisburg to get lawyers to serve as bond counsel. But Bill recognized that with his experience and his knowledge of the law, there was really no reason that we could not do that work just as effectively and even more efficiently locally. And indeed, that's the practice that Bill built. We ultimately became the first firm in northwestern Pennsylvania to be listed in the Red Book, which is the seal of approval for the municipal bond market. We really, to this day, remain one of the busiest and best regarded bond counsel firms in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Bill, in the late 1980s, was at the annual conference of the National Association of Bond Lawyers in Chicago, and he hatched a plan with some Philadelphia lawyers to create a Pennsylvania Association of Bond Lawyers that could respond to the particular needs of the issuers in our state. And Bill became an initial board member and the second president of that organization in 1989. He paved the way for me to serve on the board and as president, and then Tim Sennett followed as a board member and president, and also as the secretary of that organization, which is the power position for many years. And just last year, Tim Wachter of our firm has joined the board and succeeded Tim as secretary. So we're really proud of that tradition that Bill continued. Bill's grandson and Tim's son, Christopher, practiced with us in governmental law and bond law for a number of years, and now is doing that full-time with a prominent firm in Washington, D.C., and he was, of course, the fourth generation of Senate lawyers, which also includes his mother, Nancy, who was on the staff of Erie Insurance, who's with us this evening. Now, Bill served and developed that practice while also serving as president of the firm from 1985 to 1994, as David mentioned, and that was a time of significant growth for our firm. We grew to well over 30 lawyers during his tenure and hired a number of paralegals, but we also grew qualitatively. Bill was a prime mover in insisting that every lawyer in the firm develop a specialization, which was not the way lawyers in Erie typically practice, but that really was responsible for turning us into a modern law firm, into what we into what we're doing today. And, you know, again, hard to make changes, as David mentioned, but Bill was always able to accomplish that. Bill continued his public service quietly. In 1979, Governor Thornburg appointed him to the Pennsylvania Appellate Court Nominating Committee. In 1994, he worked behind the scenes to advance the nomination by President Clinton of our Knox colleague Sean McLaughlin to be appointed to the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Pennsylvania, the third member of our firm to join, and the son of one of those three the three founders that were still there when Bill was at the firm. And John McLaughlin, Sean's father, was a predecessor of Bill's as president of the firm. And of course, as you all know, Judge McLaughlin served with great distinction in that role for 20 years and then became the general counsel at Erie Insurance, and in the last few years had returned to our firm. Again, I also want to note here that Bill was responsible for the hiring by our firm of a Mercyhurst alum who had gone on after graduating from law school to practice with a large firm in Phoenix, Rich Lanzillo, who is now a magistrate judge. And Bill was Rich's mentor not only in the firm, but also at Mercyhurst, where Rich followed Bill ultimately as chairman of the board of Mercyhurst University until he needed to step down from the board when he assumed his position on the bench. Bill, again, had a lot of influence on other judges in our community. Shortly after Judge McLaughlin left the firm in 1994, Bill was selected by our newly elected Governor Tom Ridge to serve on the 10-member Keystone Committee, which was composed of distinguished business and banking executives, college presidents, leaders from across the state, who really helped develop the policy agenda for the Ridge administration. They flew around the country. They met with governors in various states who at that time were developing innovative solutions for the challenging problems of economic development, welfare reform, educational reform, government efficiency. And as I said, they developed a policy agenda for Tom Ridge. And many of the members of that committee were then nominated or appointed by Governor Ridge to his cabinet or to other leading positions in state government. In Bill's case, Governor Ridge nominated him to serve for an open term on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And unfortunately, once again, politics intervened, and Bill was not confirmed by the Pennsylvania Senate. It was a close party line vote. Long story behind that, but again, another opportunity where we could have had Bill Sennett as a very distinguished jurist. In 2007, Bill was selected as Chancellor of the Bar, which is the Erie County Bar Association's highest honor and a fitting capstone to his career. We have a couple of other members of our firm who have received that award here this evening. And Bill certainly remained an elder statesman in the eyes of all of us at the firm. He was a regular participant in all of our firm's social events right up until the time of his death, and we always enjoyed visiting with Bill, who's depicted here with other presidents of the firm at our 50th anniversary back in 2007. So to wrap up my portion of this, we may ask, so what would have happened if Bill had chosen to practice law in a larger city, or he'd been elected governor, or he'd been elected to an appellate court? Well, we really don't ever know that. I mean, we can be certain that everyone would have benefited from that. I mean, he was someone who, we must recall, at one point in his career had as his clients everybody who lived in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And they all would have benefited enormously from Bill's expertise and wisdom, as that forecast said, always bright, fair, and cool-headed. The flip side of that, of course, though, is that we know that the trajectories of his clients in Erie, the trajectory of Mercyhurst University, of the Jefferson Society, of the Historical Society, the lives and careers of those of us who are privileged to practice with him at the Knox firm, the lives of all those who continue to be inspired, as I am every day, by Bill's wisdom and example, would all have been much different and much less rich if Bill had not been a part of our lives in Erie. So when I contemplate the course of Bill's life and career as it actually ended up. I'm going to choose from his deep well of religious faith, which you can read about in David's piece. And I'll quote the Apostle Paul in his letter to the Romans: "We know that all things work together for good to those who love God and who are called according to his purpose." So we're all privileged to have had that experience to work with Bill, and I hope others of you here will be willing to share any brief recollections or comments you have about Bill. I'm not sure who's directing this part of the program, but I thank you for your attention.